Welcome to Revolutionary War Rarities, the podcast of the Sons of the American Revolution. Like, follow, and subscribe to our podcast in your favorite application. You can also follow our podcast at fastfunhistory.com. For education resources provided by the National Society Sons of the American Revolution, go to education.sar.org. And now, Revolutionary War Rarities.
Hi folks, and welcome to Revolutionary War Rarities, the podcast from the Sons of the American Revolution. Today we have another guest. This is Mr. Steve Homan. Steve, welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Glad to have you here. Steve is the producer of the Revolutionary War Rarities podcast, so he is very familiar with what we do here, but today's episode is entitled Blueberries and Rebellion. Now, why would we have Steve Homan here on Blueberries and Rebellion? Well, according to visitmaine.com, the largest most significant producers of blueberries in the world today is in the blueberry belt of Maine.
Right.
And Maine plays a role in the American Revolution. Now, it wasn't known as Maine back then. It was part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony,
yes.
Correct? And so we're going to be talking about that, and we're going to be talking about what many people consider to be the first naval battle of the American Revolution, but not all. That's a little debatable.
Like anything in the Revolution, right? The history is always debated.
Right.
You know, what was the first this? What was, was it the Boston Massacre? Was it earlier? Was
right.
it later? Was it Lexington? Where does it all begin? But this story is not only how we met.
Right.
We're at Congress, right, telling this story. But I always find it interesting because I'm very familiar with the waters of Maine. I've sailed in Maine. I learned how to sail when I lived in Maine as a teenager. When I went back as an adult, I raced raced sailboats in the Gulf of Maine Ocean Racing Association. Right. So I'm familiar with these waters, and when you hear this story, it's just fantastic. So we've got three real key characters here in this story. We have a man by the name of Ichabod Jones. He's a merchant, and then most importantly to the British, he's a loyalist, right? Okay. So, so the British are very interested in him. We have a midshipman named James Moore, and he will wind up being sent to Machias with Ichabod Jones on this mission with the Margaretta, and that's the HMS Margaretta that they sail up there. And then our third key player is Jeremiah O'Brien, and he will wind up taking command of a vessel and going after the Margaretta. So as we're dealing with this, the time is in June of 1777. We're leading into the Battle of Bunker Hill. This is 5 days before the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Okay, so this all started in Boston, right?
It started in Boston.
Boston
yes.
is under siege.
It is.
Now let's talk. Now, what made Boston siegeable?
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's a word.
It works for me.
What made it possible to lay siege to Boston was a geographical situation that existed back then that doesn't exist today. It's called the Boston Neck. We didn't lay siege to Boston via the waters, and Boston sits out on a peninsula to this day. It sits out on a peninsula, but back then it was more of a peninsula because of the Boston Neck. And the Boston Neck was about 120 feet wide at high tide.
Right.
So we could lay siege to a 120-foot wide piece of land with the troops that we had.
Right. And of course, the British Navy had command of the seas at that time, and certainly had command of that area. So all shipping for the British had to come through the seas. And the British were already familiar with Machias, and Machias were familiar with the British because there was always this trade for lumber and food.
All right, so therein lies the other point, right? Boston is covered up in British troops. Where there are troops, there needs to be housing in some form or fashion, right?
Correct. And they certainly can't go get the materials for that.
Not by land.
Not by land, right.
Okay, so they need wood to create cabins for the British soldiers.
Correct.
And they know that there is wood in
Maine.
Machias, Maine.
Correct.
Machias is in the middle of the blueberry belt in Maine. To this day, it's still a major producer of blueberries in the world.
Right. Only about 2,050 people to this day live in Machias.
Okay.
It's still a small town.
And so Thomas Gage says, these people need food, we need wood. Take food to them, bring back wood, and we'll get
Yeah, so
start
Ichabod
there.
Jones had gotten into his ear and probably figured there'd be a way to make some money on
And
this
once
deal.
again, Ichabod Jones was
He's the loyalist and the merchant.
and the merchant. So he has
Yes.
ships.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So also in this, there was two purposes. One was to secure the wood, but also earlier, another ship, the HMS Halifax, had run aground, and there was guns on that ship. And so they were to get the guns back off of Halifax and come back with the guns and the wood in exchange for the food.
So by this time, Thomas Gage knows the American colonists are serious about this revolution. This is not play. This is war.
This
and
is
he
war.
knows it. Okay.
So they go to Machias.
Okay.
And
Ichabod
Machias
Jones takes the ships to Machias.
takes his two ships.
Okay.
And one is Unity, the other one is Polly. And Unity will become a key player shortly. But he takes his two ships, followed by the Halifax, and they go up to Machias. Now, Machias had already gotten word that this was going to happen. And they had already discussed it and said, we are not going to trade with the British. We're not, we need the food, but we don't need it that bad.
Right.
Because this time there was an embargo, right? So they were not going to violate that. So when they get to town and go to trade, the town's already voted no. And so they call...
We don't want your food.
We don't want your food, and we certainly don't want to give you our lumber.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So
because we know how you're going to use the lumber.
Correct.
Okay.
So
good.
with that, they bring the Margaretta within firing range, and all of a sudden the town has a complete change of heart, right? They decide we're going to go ahead and trade. Why not?
Guns change the minds, and okay, we'll take your food.
Yeah, they're motivated.
Okay.
And so, so at that point, Ichabod Jones says, well, wait a second. If you voted before not to trade, I'm not selling to you. And that takes the town that was already really not willing to do anything with these folks and just infuriates them.
So he took a level of arrogance and said, if you voted for me against me last time, I don't care if you voted for me this time because I forced that vote because I was pointing guns at you.
Correct.
Okay.
And you're not getting anything.
All right.
And so things just go horribly wrong. So during the church service, the local militia decides they're going to go ahead and arrest Jones, and they're going to arrest more. Jones sees them coming through the window. He takes off, and he goes to the woods, and he winds up going to the woods for 2 days, finally comes out and is arrested. Moore makes it back to the Margaretta, and he gets out of town.
Okay.
Sons of Liberty follows him along the river, because keep in mind, Machias is a river community, right? So they're up in a river, so they kind of have to drift out of the river. You're not sailing out of the river, you're kind of drifting out of the river until you reach the bay, and then you're sailing. So they drift down the river and they go, we'll just get out of range and we'll be fine.
So they're moving slowly through the river. They get to the bay, and what happens?
The Sons of Liberty catch up with them, and they start having battles from the shore with the Margaretta, telling them, you're going to surrender to us, and you're going to give us the ship and all this. And they go, no. They take some shots, and they finally set sail. Well, in that time, 2 ships have set sail to go after the Margaretta. One is the Falmouth Packet, and one is the Unity. So when we talk about how we get these ships, well, the Unity was owned by Ichabod Jones right up until the time he was arrested. So his own ship is now going after the Margaretta. The pursuit ensues, and in the inexperience of the midshipmen, James Moore gets the best of him. And this is where I get so excited about this story, because I've sailed these waters. These are not predictable waters always. And so he does a very violent maneuver called a jibe, J-Y-B-E.
Jibe.
Yes,
Okay.
he jibes the boat. And what happens in a jibe is you have the wind behind you. And because you can't sail directly downwind, you have to sail at off angles.
Now, wait a minute. Is the jibe intentional?
It can be, but
it
it
can
can also
also
be
be
accidental.
unintentional.
And
Okay.
I've done both, and
Okay.
neither are.
And I'm assuming in this case it's probably accidental.
It was either accidental or they weren't fully prepared for how violent it is. Because what happens is the sails are on one side, and as the wind catches, it violently goes to the other side. And if you can control that, then you can make that a little bit more of a pleasant experience. But if you do a hard jibe, you can cause damage, you can get injured. And in this case, they broke 2 key components of the Margaretta. One's called the boom, which holds the bottom of the sail flat, and one's the gaff that holds the top of the sail flat. So they're major propulsion systems now injured.
So now the Sons of Liberty can catch up to the Margaretta.
Right. Unity catches up to the Margaretta and
Kills
a
Moore.
battle ensues. Moore is shot twice. He winds up taking 2 shots to the chest and dies a few days later.
Okay.
But in a very seemingly, what appears to be a very short battle we take the margarita. So they never got the guns, they never got the wood, we got the ship, we got the food.
Nice.
And the town had worried about the town had worried about retaliation, and there is a second battle of Machias in which the British were also defeated again.
Very good.
So Machias stood fast against the British and did a great job. So
wonderful.
that's the story of the arguably first naval battle of the American Revolution.
So blueberries in rebellion. Who thought that a territory that grew blueberries and still does to this day had such an impact on the American Revolution? What is arguably, not absolutely, but arguably at least one of the first naval battles in the American Revolution. Thomas Gage sent food in return to expected wood. We got the food, he got no wood.
Lost a midshipman, lost a ship.
Lost the ship and lost the guns that had been run aground, I guess,
on Halifax.
on the other ship. Wonderful.
Exactly.
And therein, folks, is yet another Revolutionary War rarity, Machias, Maine, and the naval battles that occurred there during the American Revolution. Thank you so much for being a part of Revolutionary War Rarities. We appreciate you being here. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Revolutionary War Rarities. My name is Jim Griffith.
My name's Steve Holman.
And this has been a production of the National Society, Sons of the American Revolution. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.